Two superstars went toe-to-toe in Boston as Jayson Tatum and Kevin Durant dueled to the final buzzer, and a 54-point performance won the day. We break down the game, the short and long-term outlook for the Brooklyn Nets with the playoffs looming, and when to expect that next star, Ben Simmons, to get on the court. All coming up right after the theme music.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Brooklyn, yo. All right, welcome back to the Locked On Nets podcast on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. I'm Adam Armbrecht, covering the New York Football Giants on the One Giant podcast. He's Doug Norrie, owner-operator of DFSR, for all your daily fantasy sports rankings, FanDuel, DraftKings. He's got you covered. We thank you for making us your first listen of the day, free on all those great platforms, and remind you that today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline for more props, odds, and bets all season long than ever before. Bet Online, where the game starts. And we start, Doug, with what was, a loss, first and foremost, for the Brooklyn Nets against the Boston Celtics, but also a playoff-level intensity superstar battle between Jayson Tatum and Kevin Durant as the Nets fall 126-120.
Yeah, like from a Sunday, geez, I'm already losing days. For a Sunday afternoon game, like sort of prime time, ABC, if you were able to be at home and catch it, it was everything you wanted in a basketball game. It was like the result is terrible, obviously, for the Nets, but from just a high level, what you hope to get when you turn on a basketball game on any given day, like this basically had everything you wanted. Two superstars dueling, a lot of just kind of like implications on the line, possible playoff matchup at some point, though that probably would need to shake out in a weird way for that to happen. A revisiting of last year's playoffs, where the Nets basically took them to task. So it really had all the stories and the play at a super high level that you want. It just ends up that the Nets just lose another game here and their season becomes even more and more precarious.
And it's super interesting because this was two superstar talents, Durant, Tatum, going at it with one another, which is awesome. But I did take a step back and think about that Jayson Tatum, who's only 24 years old and has always been regarded as one of the best players in the league and a rising talent. It's happened all year. He dropped 54 points on Brooklyn. And I wasn't shocked by the fact that he did that because he's shown now that he can do this with regularity. And it was an interesting reminder that, like, where a player is in his first couple of years, if you're not LeBron James when you walk into the league, or you're not Kevin Durant, where they are in the first year or two of their career, it can change a lot over the next couple of seasons. And Jayson Tatum is now as high up on the hierarchy of talents in the NBA. And when you watch a game like this, like, that's what I saw. I saw a guy that's playing as confident as he's ever played in his career, that has every facet of his game going for him over this winning streak now, 14-16 for the Boston Celtics. Like, it was pretty impressive. It was impressive to watch him and Durant go at it. Like, to your point, like playoff level basketball, that's what you want to see.
Yeah, it's reminiscent of what happened in this series last year. If you remember, like the one game that Boston was able to steal in a series that Brooklyn mostly ran over them in the game, or over the course of the 5-game series, the one game they were able to steal was the game that Tatum dropped 50 points and basically carried Boston completely on his back. And, for a second, you think, oh, is this going to be a series? It wasn't, because they just ended up totally boat racing them from then on in. But this did kind of harken back to that series a little bit. And we're at a point now in the league, we're going to talk about the implications of the game and obviously what it means for the Nets and some things that went right and some things that went wrong, obviously. But from a high level, in the NBA now, when you look at like the group of, let's say, top 15 and better, the top 15-ish players, let's put Tatum in that list, and if not higher. If they're going to have just like a career game, it's going to be hard to win, right? Now, that you can win when you have other requisite talent on the other side, like the Nets do, but it's going to be difficult. We just saw this with LeBron against Golden State on Saturday night, right? Like LeBron, basically, he scores 50 plus points and they beat Golden State. This is kind of what happened here when you get like two guys that are just going to hit their, basically their peaks, because Durant had an amazing game in his own right. But yeah, if you just drop 54 points and they shoot 47% from three, you are going to have a massive uphill battle when it comes to winning the game. And that's what happened with the Nets here. Could they have won the game? 100%. Should they have? That one's a little closer to me, but you don't want to, it's hard to look at like the net, like fault. I want to fault the Nets because they should have won, but just like if you just take it in perspective for 1 second in this game, the dude dropped 54 points in like one of the very best games that anybody in the NBA has had this entire season, right? Like those just don't often happen in those just don't often happen in losses, I guess.
Right. And that's like the context of it, of like, I think recent track record for Brooklyn makes you think, oh, they should win this game. They could win this game because you feel like it's been building to this point. But also, when someone drops 54 points, it's not usually heck of an effort. Too bad you lost by 15, Boston. So that's the other piece of it. And I thought that the other narrative that tied into this big performance, it's good actually you mentioned last year, because Boston was an underdog in that series, not expected to win. Tatum tries to do everything he can, and it really isn't much of a series. But coming into this season, we talked about how, whether it's Boston or any other team in the East or any team in the league, wants to send a message, target on the back of the Brooklyn Nets. And this, to me, was the example. Like, you show up in Boston. It's a different reason maybe why teams want to send a message to the Brooklyn Nets at this stage of what they're going through. But this is what the Nets are going to face for the remaining 18 games, of the season. This is going to be this every single night. And by the way, you'd like to think that 37 points and a great performance from Kevin Durant should be enough, but maybe this is an indication that it's not always going to be. There's still another player in Ben Simmons to come along here. Kyrie didn't have a Kyrie type night overall for himself, but like it was an interesting moment of pause to say one player in Jayson Tatum was able to beat the Brooklyn Nets, at least in one game. At least in this game, he was able to be the entirety of that team, and it was enough. And that was, I don't want to say surprising, but it certainly was eye-opening.
Yeah, and when you pile all the rest of the Nets season on top of it, it looks worse. I was trying to isolate it for the one game. I recognize at this point in the season, you simply cannot do that. We're in catching a falling knife territory with the Nets, and it's just not. It's every game that goes by, you get 31 from Durant against Miami and lose. That's tough. You get 37 this game and lose, and that's another tough one. In a game that I generally felt they played pretty well, right? Yeah. Like I thought that this game, it's hard to find a ton of fault in things that they did. Some defensive stuff, maybe a few rotational things here or there, but nothing like nothing macro. It's just that I think you put it really well by saying that this rest of the season is probably going to be playoff level intensity from here on out. It has to be for the Nets. Like, it has to be for the Nets. They actually have there's no more lifelines here to call. Right. They have to win. They simply can't take it. They're gonna have to go into Philly. They're not gonna have Simmons. That's gonna be another very, very tough game. Like, they have some other really, really tough games here. And the understanding that every team is going to bring that level of intensity because they would love to not see you. Like, this is like every team from here, short of the Orlandos and teams like this that are out of it, every other team in this playoffs scenario just would love to not see the Nets if that's what their choice. And if you can remove the possibility of them being in the playoffs now and just have it out of the way before you even get to the end of before you even get to playoff time, that has to be sort of the marching orders for everybody. So it's just not going to dial back from here on out. Like, this is going to be hard. And we know Simmons is at least a few games away. I think, that looks like that's sort of around in the shape around when he's going to be back. By the way, utterly predictable. We'll talk about that, but like utterly predictable what's going to happen here with Simmons. But yeah, like, you're totally right. This is just going to be, we just have to knuckle up for this. It's going to be hard from here on out.
And to your point, just real in terms of rounding out that playoff picture, when you talk about Toronto, Charlotte, the Nets, Atlanta's, obviously playing better of late. But if you're any team in the East and you go, maybe I'd rather the Wizards. I think I'd rather the Wizards be one of the teams that's trying to play their way into a 7th or 8th seed that we may have to look at, or the New York Knicks. Like, those are the next two teams that are coming up there that you would, there's just no world where you go, no, you know what? They've had a bad year. I'll take Kevin Durant and Kyrie with a little bit of Ben Simmons. I think it's going to work out fine.
If you can get Kevin Durant out of the playoffs, if you're the East, if you can remove Kevin, by the way, forget the Nets. If you can just get Kevin Durant out of the playoffs now, like all the coaches in the East have to be like on the phone with each other, just being like, hey, please try your hardest against these guys. Like, we'll all band. That's one thing every team would vote on now together. Like, they wouldn't really do this, but there has to be a tacit understanding that if you can get Kevin Durant out of the mix now, that raises the floor of everybody else in the playoff picture, because he's the best player in the East. Like, if not the whole NBA, when he's the best. Like, this is why it's so scary. This last home stretch is going to be so scary for this team. And the Boston game was a perfect example.
And by the way, so we're going to get into a couple of late game sequences, but then also just getting a sample size on Kyrie Irving with Kevin Durant, and then Seth Curry and Dragic, some of these players that haven't been able to be on the court together yet. But before we do, got to tell you about our friends over at Built Bar. And that's because, if you're trying to keep yourself healthy, trying to be positive with what you eat and put in your body, Built Bar has to be a part of it. We know that every single one of these bars is covered 100% real chocolate, but they also have the new protein infused puffs. Marshmallow with protein. Who knew you could do it? Built Bar did. And they're not only delicious and covered in 100% real chocolate, but they're just as good for you as all the other great tasting bars. That's because most of the Built Bars are going to give you just 130 calories, only 4 grams of sugar, 4 grams of net carbs, and 17 grams of protein. You compare that with those disgusting candy bars, over 240 calories and 30 grams of sugar. How dare they even suggest that I eat that? You get over to the website where they've got mint brownie, coconut almond, and new for this month, my friends, white chocolate cookies and cream. They're all delicious. They're all good for you. Got to make it a part of your daily routine and check back early and often because they're always bringing out new great flavors over there on built.com. So then we talk about, which I will just quickly say, one of my thoughts coming out of this was, as we look at the late game sequences and what we saw from this team overall, I've been saying, just get me to the playoffs. Like that's been my agenda. I've been sticking with it. I feel good about it, or I felt great about it. Now I feel good about it. And there is this world, a couple more losses here, and watching what Atlanta does, like we're dangerously close to me starting to be a little bit more concerned here. Now I know it's only maybe 5 games away from Ben Simmons being involved, and this team can go on a run. But the reality of the game against the Celtics was just like in the playing games. And I say, you get me there, I'll take my chances. But it's only one unlucky bounce. Like it's only one weird sequence that forces you not only to lose a playing game, but maybe lose one of the key games down the stretch here. The Nets lost this game by 6. Were they that far away from having a chance to win it? No, but they lost it. So it's another loss. Like it doesn't matter now. It's done and in the books. And when you think about the Toronto games and you think about going back and getting that one win against Milwaukee, great. But now you do start to look at the schedule and say, like, those opportunities to say, we got really good sample sizes from the team. We like the way some of these players are playing right now together. That's all well and good. I'm not there yet, but I'm on the edge of saying, like, oh, Warren, you need to have a 5-game win streak territory, or there's real concerns here.
Yeah, 100%. Like they have to, there's just, again, you can't reiterate this enough. There's going to be the theme going on for the rest of the season here is that they just can't, every loss now is compounded. There's these, and this is why, especially when you talk late game, when they're just in this game and they're trading baskets at the end, and it looks like it can really just, I know they lost by 6. The game was much closer than that. Like this was, I would call this, a 1-possession game, basically. Like it gets away with the foul shots and like some misses at the end, but this is basically a 1-possession game for all intents and purposes for the last few minutes of the game. And that's what's going to make all of this nail biting from here on out too. Like these are going to be the Nets have not given themselves the cushion to be able to afford not getting some of these 50-50 games. That's why that Miami loss on Friday was like sucks so bad, right? Like it's that they have to win those games when they're gifted. When a game is absolutely gifted to them by no Jimmy Butler or PJ Tucker, they have to win. I don't care that they didn't have Kyrie Irving. Like there's no excuse. They have to win that game because these other Celtics games are actually going to be more like coin flip territory, right? Like this is going to be more 50% evenly matched. Maybe you go in, like I think Celtics might have been 2-point favorites going in, 1-point favorites going in, something like that, which is with the home court advantage, essentially like a coin flip type game. And it turns out that way in the end, except that the Nets have just come on the wrong side of these coin flips every single part of the year when they've been there, in addition to already just like losing tons of games. So they've lost all the games that they probably should have lost, and they have not won enough of the close ones. And that's right, where they find themselves in this situation. But, in terms of like how they close, like rotational stuff, I wouldn't have done anything different. It's just that they just couldn't, they couldn't stop Tatum at all. Like, that's really it. Maybe you want to see more Durant on him specifically. I can hear that. There's probably a little too much like Seth Curry getting switched on to him near the end. But short of that stuff, like what are you going to do if the guy hit a pull-up on every single guy on the team? Like he got to the basket at will. Like he was just in his bag the whole game. It's a guy like that level when he's there, it's going to be very difficult for almost anyone to stop him.
And this was, just so the big piece for me, just on the closing sequences, the 5-minute mark, the Nets were down 110-106, and Bruce Brown had a block on the interior after multiple offensive rebounds for the Celtics. And it looked like that was the turning point. The Nets got up 111, 110. And I think maybe off of this is you said trading buckets. It's like once you get the lead, it feels like you should be able to maintain that. And I do
Yep.
think as we talk about sample size, 'cause I won't even bother with too much of what went on here. There was some there's triple from Kevin Durant. Kyrie got a couple of shots to go, missed one in the lane as well. And ultimately, like you say, they lose on foul shots down the stretch. But this is supposed to be now. This is a sample size when you think about adding in Dragic and Seth Curry and Bruce Brown playing, the best basketball of the season, certainly for himself. You add in Drummond and all these pieces. But the idea is supposed to be that you reloaded yourself to be as offensive driven as possible. So that's the only part where in these games like this, when they're tight and they're close, you should, once you get the lead, you should be able to maintain that. You should be able at that point to go bucket for bucket. And I thought
Yep.
the difference was, you mentioned Tatum. Tatum was able to come down and get his looks, get to his spot. And then you also had Marcus Smart knock down a big triple as well for them. But similar to what we've seen in recent games, the difference is that the Nets start to struggle into that ISO basketball late. And then when the blitzing defense comes, they're still trying to figure out what are the couple of sequences that get us to an open look. Because we did see down the stretch of this game a few great ball rotations all the way around, getting to open looks in the corner. Kyrie missed one. Claxton got a rebound, ended up ultimately in Curry's hand for the left corner triple that brought them back into it. Like, you saw some glimmers of it, but this is also a part of integrating these new pieces and saying, can you figure it all out on the fly and not lose 2 or 3 possessions? Kevin Durant had a turnover, right? Like, that's what you still sacrifice as you integrate these guys. You said you wouldn't have done anything really differently. I thought by and large, Steve Nash did a good job in this game, kind of taking what was happening and pivoting off of it, because there were what felt like plus matchups that turned out to be to their detriment as well.
Yeah, the Drummond thing wasn't working at all. They got away from him for the most part, right? Like,
Yeah.
the drop coverage piece was not working. He's too slow and coming up and pick and roll. That's why they're able to get lobs on him, and it's just too slow. They get away from him. They don't really play him. They go kind of double big at times. They play a lot more Claxton. I think you're fine with that. In general, I think Claxton, for like what the Celtics were throwing at them, is a better matchup. They're so thin in terms of like guarding wings, like wings that can guard up or guard like 2 through 4 or something like that. Right now they just, like, except for Durant, and it's so hard to overtax him in these games by putting him in really terrible defensive matchups. So I kind of get it. Like, this is
Would you have used Kessler Edwards at all?
no, because I think no, because I think I like in no, I would not
Well,
have.
'cause the reason why I brought it up was because I saw some people, like, suggesting that, and I kind of get it from the standpoint of we view him as this defensive piece that you can utilize, but this is what, just in terms of what I think they're trying to develop here. They want to be able to have this guard shooter heavy roster around Kevin Durant, and then when Kyrie Irving's out there as well. So I think
Well, the hope here is like this is going to be Ben Simmons. Like, this is going to be Ben Simmons
that's
that's stepping up and taking
yep,
the Tatum
yep,
matchup. Like, this is the exact guy. It's frankly the exact, like, sort of at least defensive body that they
yeah.
needed in this game. They needed him to be there to kind of at least speed bump, if nothing else, Tatum, just in terms of size and strength. Like, this is the hope that you don't have him here. I think that they were again hoping that they weren't going to have to trade away offense, which they didn't. Like, the 120 points is the most any team has put up on Boston since December. Like,
Yeah.
this is one of the best, if not the best, defensive team in the league. The Nets had like very little trouble scoring on them. Right, like, they put up again 120 points. I look at the Utah back in December 16th was the last time a team scored this many points against the Celtics, and it really hasn't even been close. Like, there's a lot, they're holding teams under 100, so to drop 120 points on arguably the best defense in all of basketball really shouldn't be overlooked. Again, you allow 126 and you lose. I would say most nights this ends up being a win if this is your kind of offensive output. And so I think going this way and trading off and saying, hey, we're going to play Bruce Brown and Seth Curry here. We understand this is like not ideal in terms of size. We're going again. I couldn't tell you enough. Like, every single time I'm watching Seth Curry getting switched on the Tatum, my heart sinks a little bit. Right.
Mm.
And like, which happened way too often down the stretch. That's what you just have to live with. I think that's the correct gamble. We've been critical of Nash. Like, I get it. Maybe some people think we're not critical enough. I don't think I would have made a lot. Like, we're gonna put James Johnson into late game sequences. Like, no chance. Like, what else you like? I would not have put Kessler Edwards out here on an island to try to figure out the Tatum thing. I get that people want to do that stuff because like they don't see it, so they think it's going to look better. I don't think it would have. But in general, like, I don't think that's a change I would have made. All right, I know we got some more stuff here to talk about. Because I want to get into a few more pieces of this. First, going to talk about our friends over at Bet Online. Football might be over, but basketball is in full steam. We got the pros, obviously college hoops heating up now as well. BetOnline has all the latest odds, totals, player performance, props, maybe even where the next coach is going to get fired. The NBA we're probably past that point right now, but betonline.net is the number one spot for all of your sports betting needs. BetOnline remains the best spot for all your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. They got basketball, hockey, boxing, UFC, everything you could ever dream of and more. Head on over to betonline.net. Set up yourself with an account. You will not be sorry. They got everything you need on the betting front. Bet Online, where the game starts.
And so I think we stay in this area here because the Andre Drummond performance. I'll start with that. When the trade was made for Ben Simmons and then you got Seth Curry and you got Drummond, I thought that you and I were in the right mindset of saying this is another guy that can do some good things, and we praised him for the best passer they have now out of the 5 role. He obviously is a thick body, can do a lot of good for you, and also he is no more plug and play, lock him in. This is your starter than LaMarcus Aldridge or Nicholas Claxton or Blake Griffin or James Johnson. There's a hierarchy there and a value to each and every one of those guys. But I thought that this was kind of the example of, yeah, man, like this is what it is. And to maybe your point about you live with the results of having Seth Curry in the lineup and what those switches can look like. You're also living with whatever you're going to get from this group of players because none of them do enough things well to be consistent on a game-to-game basis. Claxton did some nice things defensively, and then you also saw the impact of having him on the court, specifically even on the defensive end. He was out switching. He's on the perimeter. Who was your interior stopper? Kevin Durant. That wasn't going to work well for you, right? And then on the offensive end, there's no spacing there. He's not an outlet for shots, etc. Do you think that this is just a scenario where the Giants call up and say, hey, if we can have Kevin Durant for tight end, if the Nets, I think we were in the right camp of saying it's another body, but this is what the Nets are doing. It's a game-to-game basis. It's a matchup-to-matchup basis. And the guy that you mentioned, Ben Simmons, he's the guy that fixes a lot of these issues because of the value he brings defensively, not being plugged in at the pseudo 5 role, but just because he can take on the number 1 matchup and then everybody else benefits in behind him.
Yeah, because ultimately, I think what you're looking at in terms of closing situations and high leverage games is something like Irving, Curry, Brown, Simmons, Durant. Like that's going to be the closing 5. And they're going to play Durant or Simmons at the 5. We saw this at the end of the Heat game. We talked about this. I talked about it. I talked about it with Jack and Nick over from Brooklyn Buzz too. Like that. The scenario is they're going to go super small in these situations and just dare you to be able to see if you can A, keep up with it, and B, keep up with the speed and just be flying around on defense. And Simmons adds like a new element to that. At the end of the Heat game, when they went small, they nearly won. They should have gone smaller earlier, and 90 more seconds to that, and they probably win. And I think that's they're not going to, I don't think it'll start that way. I think sometimes these nominal center starters is just kind of what teams have done for time on end. Sometimes I get it. Sometimes I don't. Drummond has utility and will have utility facing a guy like Embiid going the other way. Like you're going to need his body against a guy like Embiid. But ultimately, I'm not so concerned about the Drummond thing. I'm not surprised by it at all. I just knew that this was the player that they had on their hands. There's going to be times where it looks good. There's going to be time, he was great against Milwaukee too. Right. It's like, there's going to be scenarios where you really, really need him. I should have thrown in the Giannis thing. But this just wasn't it. But I'm just not worried about it in that sense. If I can take away the worry about where we get to the playoffs or not, I'm not as worried about these late game sequences because this is a team built to go really small like this. Like you play Durant and Simmons or something like that at the 4 and the 5, you're just probably fine against most situations against teams that are even a little bit wing heavy, like guys like Tatum and stuff. So again, I maybe people aren't going to want to hear that I'm not as bummed by this particular game on an X's and O's piece of this game. I'm not as upset. I'm upset by the result, but not by kind of what we saw. And I think that there's a scenario where it gets better. It's just, again, we're just in a situation is there going to be enough time? But in terms of Drummond, I don't know, whatever. It's he is what he is. I got good minutes out of Aldridge at the 5, I think, too. He was able to add a little scoring punch here that, that definitely helped them.
Aldridge is the guy who everyone was saying, he's a step slow on defense. Of course he is. Of
Yeah.
course, Aldridge. That's what he's always been. That's what he's going to be. Like, and that's where I think there's the difference of being like, well, he's he's a step slow. Like, well, yeah, but he's not going to get a step faster. Like, that's nothing is different about what you get from him. By the way, nothing's different about what you got from Claxton. He brings in some energy. He can catch a couple of lobs. He does nice switching defensively. He also picked up 4 fouls in 20 minutes. Like, these are the balancing of the books that you have to do. And every time I think that we get tantalized by, especially Claxton, let's say, but every time you get tantalized by sample size, you do have to then turn back and say, right, but every one of them has their limitations. And to your point, getting there is the ultimate goal, where a lot of these players and a lot of these minutes matter less and less based on who you think is going to be out on the court. We'll
Want to hear a funny stat real quick, just
Oh
about
yeah.
fouling? I was looking this up during the game. I was gonna tweet it out, but I just ended up not. Nets if you if you pull for have to have played 1,000 minutes ish in the league this season, so a pretty good sample size. It's like 200 plus guys. Nets have 2 of the top 5 most fouls per minute guys
Yeah.
in the league, in Drummond and your boy James Johnson.
You
Those
smush
guys
them
can
together and you
those
get
guys
one active body.
Oh, those boys can foul, boy. Like they have, it's like 2 Houston guys, Jayson Tatum, Sengun, and then basically, basically Drummond and James Johnson mixing a little Nas Reed there. So Claxton would be like in the top 25 or something like that in fouls. Anyway, I just thought that was funny. Just to have these 2 absolute foul machines on the team. It's just funny that they have them.
And James Johnson, who has that classic, I think he's my new Spencer Dinwiddie when it comes to, you call a foul on that man, the look of just total disbelief.
Guy's never committed a foul. For a guy that
gets
gets the most fouls called on him in the league, the guy's never committed one.
I can't figure it out, guys. I can't figure it out. So let's then round this out though, just a little bit here, because the Ben Simmons piece of this, as Adrian Wojnarowski updated at halftime, they said, and you talked about this, I think we talked about it together and also separately, that
I talked so much Nets over the last like 4 days. I can't even remember who I've said it to, or like, but whatever.
We've been talking about it. Yeah. The idea that, and by the way, you can say about the matchup or otherwise that the 76ers game was not going to be a viable return date for Ben Simmons. They're saying that the end of this week upcoming, which would be past, Thursday, March 10th will be the 76ers game. At the end of the week, they're looking to get him on the court with the team and doing things. I don't know if that means that Sunday, the 13th against the New York Knicks is going to be his return date, or it could be a couple of games after that there. But do you see, this is again where I come back to the Boston loss. You prefer to win it. I didn't look at it as being a bad game. I looked at it as being a game where Tatum went off and you lost it. If you told me that you gave me those exact type of games, not necessarily Jayson Tatum going for 54 every night, but a 7-game series, even without Ben Simmons, I'm like, I bet the Nets are winning a handful of those. I wouldn't be shocked if they could take the series off of Boston. So I still come back into this premise of being like, I know this is a terrible stretch and they just lost another game, but I'm not worried that they're not going to be in the playoffs. Like, am I out of my mind now knowing that we seem to have a little bit of a clearer timeline that we can expect Simmons back, let's say, by the 16th against the Mavericks, and then you're still going to give yourself a 10 to 12 game run up to the playoffs with this full unit together. And we also know it looks like the Kyrie situation is progressing gradually towards him being full-time when we come to the playoffs.
Okay, well, first of all, file this Simmons report under like the least surprising things of all time. That this is the time. I mean, we've been saying this for weeks.
Yeah.
Talked about it last week, talked about it over the weekend. We have all the receipts on this one. Like, there was no chance he was going to play Philly. It was like clear Philadelphia, and then all of a sudden I was calling it like a soft landing, like the soft landing in Orlando, maybe in New York, or at home against Dallas, which is probably that's what it's going to start looking like. There's just
a 3-game homestand there with Portland and Utah after that.
Yeah, like that would make the most sense. No Kyrie, get him into the mix with KD. Like, we've been saying this. This is the most predictable thing ever. If you just thought for 2 seconds about the whole entire situation, that this was going to be how it was going to land. I, again, filed this under, like, I couldn't be any less shocked that this is the timeline. So, yeah, there's been a whole season of this. I mean, if we went back and did like one of those word bubbles about like how many times you mentioned something, those things like the infographic where it's like how many times you mentioned something and the words get bigger because you mentioned it more, and then it's like, it'd be like ramp up is in there, and it'd be like not worried or playoffs or something like that. Those would be the words that we'd have to file away, because it's been one long season of not exactly sure when you should be worried, but just enough out there to make it so that you're not, right? Like, it's like, hey, come back. Oh, Joe Harris is out for the season. Well, that's okay, because maybe the vax mandate gets taken off and maybe Ben Simmons comes back. So maybe I shouldn't freak out. Like, there's been this has been the entire theme of the season. It's just the uncertainty around how to feel, right?
Yeah.
I think that's most of the theme.
Not only that though, too, because I was just going to say, you want to keep that theme running. Nothing could be more Brooklyn Nets than, unfortunately, Cam Thomas, Marcus Smart out in front of the arc there. He goes up, lands on his back. A few plays later, he just basically stops playing because he had to walk away from it, even as a young player. Don't know what's going to happen with him. Bruce Brown looked like, you had mentioned it, was like reaching for his eye at one point. I'm like, is there a world? And this is where I think all Nets fans, and I put myself in that group, where they go, you know what? At a certain point, it's just BS. Like, I got to call BS on the whole cosmic god NBA operation here, because just when you think, well, we're only another few games away from Ben Simmons, and they're like, yeah, but maybe we'll just steal a couple of guys from you.
Well, I was wrong about the Bruce Brown thing, and it might just be
me.
I'm looking for the things to go wrong now. Maybe like I'm just too focused on it. I would have asked him too, like after the game, were you grabbing your right thigh? I was positive. It looked like he was trying to ask out of the game. But then they came out of a timeout and he got like a steal and a dunk and he just looked totally fine. So I was obviously wrong about that. And then I was wondering again, like you said, like, am I making this up in my mind? Cause I'm just waiting for something to go wrong here. Cause like, he's been amazing. We didn't even talk about him, like Bruce Brown, like talk about a guy. And I know we're going to get out of here, but talk about a guy who's had just two totally different seasons. This guy was on the bench, could not get in the rotation, just no minutes, looked bad. And now you're like, I can't even imagine what would happen if they didn't have Bruce Brown. This has been amazing.
We'll go into deeper about him, but the two things were, one, that Bruce Brown went from making $4.7 million this year and people being like, geez, maybe we can dump off this money, to being like, what would you be willing to bring him back for in the offseason just to make sure you can keep him as a part of this roster? And on the injury front, at one point, Kevin Durant was just adjusting his foot in his shoe. He was just stomping his foot, walking towards the sideline. And I was like, come on. Was it an ankle? What is it? That's it. I'm out of here. So
of course.
It's there, man.
Sunday ruined.
As Sam Darnold once said, I'm seeing ghosts out there. Never a good sign.
All right, maybe we'll talk a little more Bruce Brown tomorrow, because there's a lot more to talk about with him. He's been so good. It's like it's almost underrated at this point. Like, he's been critical to how them even staying in games. So we'll talk a little bit more about him. Maybe we'll get a little more clarity on the Ben Simmons situation. Obviously, I think we're gonna keep hearing more and more with each passing day about that situation. And then obviously we'll get more into the rest of the week. In the meantime, make sure you subscribe over to the YouTube channel, Locked On Nets. I'm gonna put that in the show notes. Really appreciate all the follows, all the comments, everything over there. Like and subscribe to the podcast as well. That's the two ways you can help the podcast here. Subscribe to the Locked On Nets YouTube and like and subscribe to wherever you listen to podcasts.
Hey guys, we didn't lose the game. We just ran out of time. Vinny Lombardi.
One of the all-time great American poets. We'll be back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.
Just going to say my intro again now and the music, because that didn't record.